Hi friends, so this is something directly to Bill Shorten of the Australian Labor Party and the Federal Australian Labor Party itself. I don't know if you have been following what's been happening in Venezuela, but there's been a military coup that's been US backed. The US, that is our ally, has backed a military coup against a democratically elected president of a sovereign country, Venezuela. It failed, which is great, and that the crippling economic sanctions that have been placed on Venezuela for the last few years has resulted in 40,000 deaths of Venezuelans. 40,000 people have died as a result of economic sanctions on Venezuela, and there are thousands, tens of thousands more that will probably die as a result of these economic sanctions. And I'm going to read you some of those figures. So this is a report from Mark Weisbrot and Jeffrey Sachs from a Washington-based group called the Washington-based Center for Economic Policy Research, CEPR, and this was published just recently. The date today is the 2nd of May, 2019. And this is just part of the sort of statistics that are a result of these U.S. Crippling economic sanctions. So let's remember this when we think about when our Labor Party, the Australian Labor Party and the coalition support Juan Guaido and endorse Juan Guaido, who's led a military coup that failed, and it was U.S.-backed, against his own people in Venezuela. And let's remember this when we talk about our ally, the U.S., and what they do to other countries, and we're supposed to be an ally of them. Just remember these statistics. Based on a number of different studies, the report, this is the report of Mark Weisbrot and Jeffrey Sachs, estimates that sanctions were responsible for 40,000 deaths in 2017 to 2018, and that there are a further 300,000 people at risk due to lack of access to medicines. This includes, quote, 80,000 HIV patients who have not had antiretroviral treatment since 2017, 16,000 people who need dialysis, 16,000 people with cancer, and 4 million with diabetes and hypertension. The report likewise argues that the sanctions have contributed to the deterioration of Venezuelans' caloric intake and to malnutrition, with food imports down 2.46 billion in 2018 from 11.2 billion in 2013. The authors warn that the decline in oil production caused by sanctions, U.S. economic sanctions, could shrink this number even further in 2019. Weisbrot and Sachs stress the sanctions are illegal under the Organization of American States Charter, while pointing out that the U.S. officials have explicitly said that their goal is to overthrow the Maduro government. The sanctions also violate U.S. law, they go on to say, since the executive orders are based on the premise that the U.S. faces a, quote, state of emergency, end quote, as a result of, quote, unusual and extraordinary threat, end quote, posed by Venezuela. Quote, this also has no basis in fact, end quote, they add. The death toll going forward this year if the sanctions remain in place is almost certainly going to be vastly higher than anything we have seen previously, end quote, the report concludes. So that was from Venezuela Analysis, reporting on a report by those two people, Jeffrey Sachs and Mark Weisbrot. So I hope that, as Australians, we start to reevaluate what we are doing in an alliance with a country which has become now a rogue state, which rejects the ICC, the International Criminal Court, tries to persecute people in the International Criminal Court, the International Crimes Court, when they suggest that the U.S. needs to be investigated for war crimes in Afghanistan. And when we look at how many countries the U.S. now, since 1946, has either attempted to overthrow or has overthrown, that's like dozens and dozens of countries, and I'll show you a little meme that I like to post, which illustrates that. And one of the countries is Australia, because we, in 1975, the Australian Labor Party party's Gough Whitlam, who was Prime Minister. The CIA admitted helping overthrow Gough Whitlam, who was for free healthcare and free public education, who didn't like the Vietnam War, and that was one of the reasons that he didn't like the Vietnam War, but there were other reasons, and the CIA admitted helping to overthrow Gough Whitlam. So I'm amazed that the Australian Labor Party continues to ally itself with a country which is causing massive carnage. And just not even speaking about the carnage in Iraq, which was done under the most recent carnage, which was the weapons of mass destruction myth, which was a lie. It was proven a lie, and they knew it was a lie. George W. Bush knew it was a lie, and so did Colin Powell, and yet they invaded that country. The Australian people got out on the streets in 2003. I was one of them, and we all protested against that war, and yet the government went ahead with it anyway. At the time, it was the coalition government, but it doesn't seem to matter anymore. The Australian government, no matter who is in, no matter if it's the Labor Party or the coalition, just seem to go along with whatever nonsense, whatever awful wars that this government, this American government, Washington, D.C., asks us to go along. We sort of say, we say, how high would you like us to jump? Look at the carnage. This is not done in my name, and it's not done in a lot of other Australians' names either. And look at how we've abandoned Julian Assange. And he's going to be extradited to the US for the crime, in quotes, of being a journalist. And this is appalling. This is an attack on press freedom. He's going for an extradition hearing today in the UK. Where are we? We're nowhere. We should be offering him asylum. We should bring him back home right now. We've completely abandoned him. And if he gets extradited to the US for the crime of journalism, he will be thrown in prison in solitary confinement for probably 45 years. He'll be tortured. He may even be executed, because that's the kind of government they have now. And it doesn't matter what side, it doesn't matter if the Democrats are in or the Republicans are in. They're a warmongering country. They have been for quite a while, and particularly since the 9/11 attacks. They just go, and there's now, Obama expanded 2 wars to 7. But now there's more than that going on. None of these countries have attacked the US. They're inventing reasons to go and attack people and attack these countries, and they're very poor reasons indeed. And Venezuela is just another one which they're constantly trying to overthrow that government. And the Carter Group has said they were one of the most transparent elections they'd ever seen, and now they're backpedaling because they've been put pressure on by the government. But Venezuela has better elections, more transparent than the United States. That's a fact. So President Maduro has actually been fairly elected. And Hugo Chavez had many, like 13 elections. The Carter Group has been following those elections and said they were fair and transparent. So we just follow along with the propaganda put out by the U.S. empire, because the U.S. empire is interested in the oil in Venezuela. It has the largest oil reserve, I think, at this point on the planet. And the same goes, Iran is 4th on that list of oil. And also they're just wanting to go through the Middle East for hegemony and for resources. We have to stop following this rogue state, which is what it is now. And it doesn't matter who's in office. It won't matter if Joe Biden gets in or Kamala Harris gets in next time. And it possibly won't even matter if Bernie Sanders gets in. Because it has its own propulsion now. The military, this was warned by Eisenhower in the 50s, that the US, the military-industrial complex is something he warned us about the military-industrial complex, Eisenhower, in the 50s. And this is exactly why. Because this is what they've been doing since 1946. I think it's 81 countries they've either overthrown or attempted to overthrow. And William Bloom, the historian William Bloom, said that the US is really only interested in global domination at this point. And the reason they're upset with Russia and China, and they've been promoting propaganda about Russia and China, is because Russia and China are economic threats to them, to the US. They are no threat. The Russia has about 1/10 of the military spending that the US has. And they're only starting to up their military, their arms and etc., because the US has started a new Cold War with them, which could turn into a hot war, and we will all pay for that. It will be mutually assured destruction. And there have been many accidents, almost nuclear accidents that have happened since all these programs have been in, and there's been more people with nuclear weapons. There's almost been nuclear accidents. There was, at the Cuban Missile Crisis, it was almost the end. It was actually a Russian officer, I think, who actually refused to fire some nuclear weapons. That was almost over for us in the early 60s, I think. So, we've got to really reevaluate. And I know why Australian politicians, and the Green Party, by the way, has said nothing about Juan Guaido being endorsed by the Labor Party and by the coalition. And the terrible excuse that we have, that I get from anybody, Bill Shorten's office, about Julian Assange and why, he's able to get consulate help like anybody else. That's absolute nonsense. That's nonsense. And yet you tell people that. It's so cowardly. Where is the moral integrity of any of these politicians, of you, Bill Shorten, of Penny Wong? I rang up about Julian Assange. I rung up Penny Wong's office, and she said, and the person on the phone, who was actually quite adversarial, said that Ms. Wong can decide who she talks about and who she doesn't. This is an Australian citizen who is, he's actually a journalist and a publisher, and he's associated with WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks is holding governments to account. And that's why all of you are silent, because you think you might be next, that they're going to release something about you. So everybody, nobody is friends with Julian Assange because of that. That's how I see it. You're all afraid of WikiLeaks, and you want it gone because you don't want to be held accountable. You may be held accountable one day. There may be a leak about you, the Australian Labor Party, or the Coalition, or even the Greens. Why are the Greens? There was a couple people in the Greens have said something about Julian Assange. I think Adam Bandt and Senator Wish Wilson. There's somebody else. But this is it's been going on for 7 years. Where were they? Why did they wait until he got pulled out of the embassy, which was breaking international law, pulling him out of the Ecuadorian embassy? And now he's been sentenced for 50 weeks. 50 weeks. A person who was in a speedboat and killed somebody got 6 months. He's got 50 weeks. And then they're doing the extradition hearings today. And if he's extradited, it could be even death for him. This is an Australian citizen. Where are you? I'm disgusted with the parties in this country. I'm disgusted. It's like, none of you represent me. That includes the Greens, advertising dairy industry, when dairy industry is actually greatly contributing to the climate crisis. I mean, seriously, you couldn't make this up. And being silent, but basically saying a few things about Assange, and now what? I don't see is anybody saying anything about him now with these extradition hearings? Are you pleading with the Liberal, the Coalition, or the Labor Party to do something? Are you really working on that, Green Party, Australian Green Party? I don't know. It's frightening. I find the state of politics in this country frightening. And by the way, if you're an Australian citizen and watching this, consider looking up MMT, Learn MMT, and look at Stephanie Kelton and what she says about the economy, about a sovereign economy and the myths about a sovereign economy. I'll leave a link in the information section of this video. Please check it out, because it will make you actually wonder what on earth these politicians are saying when they hum and ha about whether they can afford free healthcare or free education and so forth, or hum and ha whether they've got enough money to fix up the public hospitals here in, say, Tasmania. The public hospital here in Tasmania is kind of really run down. They could give money to the Tasmanian. This could be fixed. Think about that when they talk about tax, how our government budget is like a household budget. It's not. That's economically illiterate. So look into that. Dr. Stephanie Kelton, she is the economic advisor for Bernie Sanders in the 2020, and she was in 2016. She's a proponent of MMT, which is just simply a description of the operational reality of a sovereign economy. So please look into that, because you need to hold politicians' feet to the fire when they say the government budget is like a household budget, or that a sovereign economy cannot they don't use the word sovereign, but they say we can't afford this and that. They can absolutely afford free healthcare, free education, and so forth. The only constraints are resources. We need to understand that so we can get what we deserve in a good way, instead of everything always being throwing at corporations and giving them breaks and all sorts of things and feeding into them instead of feeding into us? What about homelessness in this country and all of that? So look into that, please. Anyway, we need to hold the Australian Labor Party. I'm not even going to bother with the coalition because they're so far gone. But the Australian Labor Party, who's supposed to represent the people, we have to hold them accountable with some of this nonsense. And endorsing Juan Guaido, please, is a self-appointed. He wasn't elected. And he's been groomed. You can look it up. He's been groomed by the United States for the last 10 years by the National Endowment for Democracy, which is a CIA-funded regime-changing organization. This guy's been actually funded by the government to eventually do this regime change. And the US just wants the oil in Venezuela. And also they don't like that this is a multipolar, the Venezuelan government believes in a multipolar world, and the US wants to be a unipolar world. They don't want socialism in this world, and the situation in Venezuela has nothing to do with socialism, the failure of socialism. I know the mainstream media like to put that out, but that is garbage. It's everything to do with, Maduro isn't perfect. He's made some mistakes for sure. But this whole situation with 40,000 Venezuelans dying and all of that I just read out to you has everything to do with the US empire being a bully and trying to bring that country to its knees so they turn on the government, which is what they do over and over and over again. Regime change over and over and over again with countries that don't submit to them, don't allow them to go in and take over and privatize and bring their corporations in and basically take over the country. They're like the mafia. Sorry, but they are. Anyway, thanks so much for watching. Please subscribe, as I said. And till next time, bye for now.